Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're doing my annual iPhone upgrade video because I just bought myself an iPhone 7 Plus to upgrade from my iPhone 6s. And I have to say, if I was not running a YouTube channel where I review technology on a regular basis, I probably would have stuck with this 6s for another year because I am very happy with this phone. So much so, I'm still kind of on the fence as to whether or not I want to hold on to the 7 Plus because the 6s has been such a great phone for me, and I really prefer the form factor over this much larger version. But the reason why I went up to the larger phone was because of the camera on the back. And it's actually not just one camera, it is two. We've got a wide-angle lens and a 2x zoom lens built into this thing for added video functionality as well as some additional photo stuff that's really cool. And we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about this camera in this video because, quite honestly, that is really the only big change over last year's phone. There's certainly a lot of stuff under the hood that's different. They've engineered a lot of things differently, but I think from a consumer-facing standpoint, the 7 Plus has really the only big new feature, which is this dual camera thing. And both the 7 and the 7 Plus take away a feature I know a lot of you use on a daily basis, which is the headphone jack. And I'll give you some impressions of that as well. But I do want to mention, in the interest of full disclosure, that I purchased this phone with my own funds. So all the opinions you're about to hear are my own. Nobody is paying for this review, and no one is reviewing this content before it is posted. All right, let's take a look at the hardware first. I was very surprised that Apple kept the design relatively similar to the prior phones. It really has a very similar look and feel in the hand. The 6, of course, was a very big upgrade over the 5 and the 5S. This is not a big upgrade in its overall look from the 6 or the 6S, so it's definitely a safer upgrade from Apple, I think. The back will look different on both models because on the 7 Plus, the larger phone, you get dual cameras. On the smaller iPhone 7, which will be, again, about the same form factor as the 6S, they do have a larger camera on the back, which now incorporates an optical stabilizer, which gives you smoother footage, especially if you're out walking around or something with the phone. So that was a welcome improvement on the smaller version. But again, the biggest camera upgrade comes on the biggest phone. You will not get the dual camera system on the 7. Everything else is in the same place. You got your volume rocker and your vibration switch in the same spot there. You still have the front-facing camera on the front, although it's a bigger camera now. It's got a 1080p sensor. It's also 7 megapixels versus 720p and 5 megapixels on the old one. You got a power switch here, and your SIM card goes in there just like before. The SIM card is only a single SIM, though, so you can't run dual SIMs on this like you can on many Android phones these days. Now, on the bottom of the phone, there has been a very big change, which I am sure you've heard about, which is the removal of the headphone jack. So on the old version, you could charge the phone and listen or talk at the same time. This new version, you can only charge or only listen unless you have a pair of Bluetooth headphones or one of your new expensive proprietary wireless headphones. And I didn't think this was going to be as big a deal as it's turning out to be for me, because there are situations where I like to just plug in Apple's earbuds and make a phone call while the phone is plugged in and charging, or connecting to my computer to tether data to it. So one of the things you can do with these Apple phones is, instead of using Wi-Fi as a tether, you can tether via the USB cable. So when I get on the train to New York, what I do is plug my computer into the power outlet. I plug the phone into the computer, which, by the way, requires Apple's $80 dongle here because they only have one port on the stupid computer. And then I'm able to get my data going back and forth. And then, rather than having to remember to charge a pair of Bluetooth headphones and microphones for the trip, I usually use my earbuds, which I then plug into the phone. Very easy to do on the 6S because I can plug the headphones in here, the data in there, and I'm off and running. But now that we have a single port, without buying another adapter, you can't charge and listen at the same time. And that is a big problem for me. I guess Belkin has an adapter that's going to be about $40 that will accomplish that. But again, this is basic functionality that's being taken out of the phone and now being shifted over to additional dongles that you have to carry around with you. Now, if you do have a pair of headphones you cannot live without, the good news is they give you this little tiny dongle in the box, which I know you will lose. Don't worry, you can buy a new one for around $9 a pop. What you do is plug your headphones into the plug over there, and then you plug the lightning cable into your phone, and you've got your headphones back again. They also give you a pair of standard iPhone earbuds in the box, but instead of having a headphone connector on the end, it's got a lightning connector on the end, so you can plug that in directly. But again, you cannot charge the phone while these headphones are plugged in. So I'm probably going to have to find a Bluetooth solution to my problem, which kind of bothers me because I just don't want to have to remember to charge another thing before I head out the door. But in order to get the functionality that I'm used to getting, I'm going to need to do that. Now, the other big change on the 7 and the 7 Plus is that the home button down here is no longer a button. It's just a sensor. So it still does everything that you're used to it doing. So when you push down on it, you can unlock the phone. You do get haptic feedback on it, but it doesn't actually push. So you'll feel a little click coming from the haptic engine, which, by the way, replaced where the headphone jack used to be. So you'll feel some vibration on the bottom of the phone when you do push down. It's very immediate, so it doesn't feel fake. It feels very natural, but it's not as convincing as the trackpads are on the new MacBooks and the MacBook Pros. So on those new Macs, the trackpad doesn't move at all, but when you push it down, it really feels like you're pushing into something. This one doesn't feel as natural as that because the haptic engine is kind of over here and it's vibrating the entire bottom of the phone, but it does give you enough feedback to kind of know what you're doing. What I have found with it, though, is that you have to double tap it to unlock the phone, and sometimes it doesn't get it on the first shot. Other times you have to do it a couple more times, and sometimes it thinks I want to put Siri up. So they have to really tweak the software a little bit because it's really not getting me yet. And I found the action of unlocking the prior generation of the phone to be a lot less aggravating. So far, I'm not too sold on this home button either. Now, the displays are largely the same as they were before. Same size, so the bigger phone is a 5.5-inch 1920 by 1080p display. The smaller phone, the 4.7-inch 7, which is about the same size as this 6S is a 4.7-inch screen, 1334 by 750. There is a larger and wider color gamut on the new phones, so you'll get better color density perhaps on these versus the old version, but to be honest with you, I didn't notice all that much of a difference myself. I think if you are sensitive to wider color gamuts, if you are an artist or a photographer or somebody that looks for that kind of thing, you'll probably notice it, but I don't think most consumers will. But it is nicer than the last version, even if you can't see it, I guess. The big change, though, is the loudspeakers on the new phone. So there is now stereo speakers on these phones. There weren't before. Usually the sound would just come out of the bottom. Now you'll get sound out of the headset speaker here when you're in speaker mode. It's very loud, surprisingly so, when you are in that mode, and it sounds pretty decent. So speakerphone calls sound great. You will get good stereo separation. Well, what's interesting too is that although you're getting sound out of the front of the phone on the left and kind of on the side of the phone on the right, it does sound like both are coming at you. So whatever they're doing to tweak the audio actually sounds pretty decent on here, and I was quite pleased with that. And that is a nice improvement over the last phone. Now, I do want to spend some time talking about the dual camera system on the back of the 7 Plus. Now, remember, the 7 has only a single camera. This one has two cameras. So it's got a wide-angle lens. This is the same lens that you'll find on the 7, but there's also a telephoto lens that will give you double the zoom with an optical lens versus something in software which will lose quality as you zoom in. Now, the wide-angle camera on both the 7 and the 7 Plus has a very low 1.8 aperture, which is very good for low light. It lets a lot more light into the camera than last year's version did. So the camera from the 6 and the 6S was a 2.2 aperture, which is also very good for a smartphone. This one is 1.8, which is improved and gives you better low light image quality. And here's a quick shot I took with that wide-angle lens with the iPhone 7 Plus in a lower light situation. It looks pretty nice. Now, on the 7 Plus with that telephoto lens, that one has a different aperture. That one's running at 2.8 for its aperture, so it doesn't do as well when you're zoomed in low light as it does when you're zoomed out using that other lens. Now, what impressed me was how seamless the transition between these two lenses are when you're recording video. I'm going to pull up my video image here and show you what that looks like. So right now we've got a wide-angle shot here. The lighting is all out of whack in my home studio right now because we've got studio lights going. The camera's probably very confused, but I'm going to zoom in on that table over there. I'm going to start recording also here. So what you see now above the recording light is a little 1X icon. I'm going to tap on that, and that will zoom us in automatically to the other lens. Now what's cool is that it didn't stop recording, and it actually changed sensors on us very quickly, so that's really cool. And you can see how much of a zoom you get. And again, this is an optical zoom, so you're not losing image quality when you zoom in because you're going off of that other lens and that other sensor. You can also zoom in further if you want, up to 6x. That, of course, will be a software zoom, so the image won't look as nice, but you can do that. And what I also found interesting was how seamlessly it switches between these lenses when you're doing a pinch to zoom, which I'm sure many of you do on your cameras. It really is a pretty seamless transition here. I'm going to stop recording real quick and just play back this video so you can see how it looks when you do play them back. And it is a very smooth transition on video, too, from one lens to the other. So here's that wide-angle shot, and there you can see it zoomed in. Really pretty seamless, even though you're using two different cameras to do it. So here are some outdoor shots of me using the zoom on the cameras, and there is sometimes a bit of a transition from one to the other. Sometimes you'll see slightly different colors. You can see with this shot of my barbecue that there's a bit of a color jump in between on the background there, so it's not always perfect, and I think this is primarily due to the fact that you have, first of all, two different cameras and two different sensors going, but also these two lenses are at very different apertures. So if you're in a lower light condition, you'll definitely see a decrease in quality as you shift from that 1.8 lens to the 2.8, and it might also impact you outside as well. So if you are looking for a consistent image, pick one lens and stick with it for the duration of the recording. Now, still images work the same way. So this is the wide angle lens I'm on right now. I can then push the button here and get the telephoto lens going. I can also do a pinch to zoom if I want to do that. Now, they have also added a new feature on the dual camera device here called Portrait, and this is pretty amazing. So you'll see there at the bottom it says move farther away to get the depth effect. So as I pull back here, it will eventually detect that mug in the shot, and it will blur out the background, as you can see, and I can take a picture of it and get an almost SLR-like image here. Let me pull up the image that it just took. And what's nice about this is that it gives you the image with it blurred out, but also what it saw initially, so you get an idea as to exactly what it did. And I'm finding it to be very, very accurate. It's not perfect. You can see some issues with the edges there around the mug, but if you were to upload this to Facebook, I think your friends will be pretty impressed with it, especially because it came out of a smartphone. And what this is doing is it's using both cameras to not only pull down the images, but also get a sense as to how far the mug is away from the camera, and then really be more able to accurately blur out the background. And it's a pretty convincing effect. And right now I'm using the beta version of iOS, so this is not fully baked yet. It was kind of unusual for Apple to announce a feature that is not actually available on the phone when you buy it. You have to actually go and subscribe to the beta channel of their operating system to get this portrait feature, but it's working pretty nicely. Here's a few more images. So here's one of my dog. This is the before image. You will see throughout all of these images that there's always going to be some issues around the edges. That's the one thing that I'm sure they're going to be trying to get as good as possible when this comes out of beta. So you will see some edging issues as we move through all of these photos here. So here's another good one of some flowers. When I switch over to the blurred out version, you can see it did a very nice job with this one, but again, you'll see some softness and some wackiness around the edges of each of these images. It looks better than what I could do in Photoshop, but it won't be perfect. Hair is always difficult, especially when you have strands of hair like you have down here. And what you'll see when we switch over to the blurred out version of this image is that it does a decent job, but not all the way. So some of those strands of hair get kind of lost in its blur transition there. But again, on Facebook or something, someone's really not going to notice the difference. I think it's going to be a pretty believable image that this might have been shot with a camera better than maybe your smartphone. So that was a pretty good example there. What you will see, though, are some issues when you get into more complexity. So here we've got a potted plant with a lot of stems and a lot of things going on in the picture. When I switch over to the blurred version, you can see that right over here, this stem is going to disappear completely. So there are going to be some glitches that complex images will throw at you when you're trying to get them blurred out. So it's not going to be perfect for every scenario, but I think for people and maybe a flower by itself, where you have very defined edges, it should have a better time detecting things. This one's a very challenging image because we have a hook here with the bird feeder hanging off of it. And you'll see when we switch over to the blurred out version that the hanger for the bird feeder is completely messed up because it just doesn't see it in the image because the background is kind of dark. It just has a hard time getting that image straight there. So the hook it actually does a pretty good job with. There are some little issues around the edges there, but it did a nicer job with that than it did with the hanger for the bird feeder, but that's the kind of stuff you'll run into. Low light is not so great. So this is the before image off of that 2.8 lens. A lot of noise in the picture, again, because that lens has not as wide of an aperture as the wide angle lens does. So when we switch to the blurred out version, it will get rid of a lot of the background, but the noisiness in the foreground remains, and a big strand of her hair gets kind of lost in that noise there. So I think the way this will work the best is when you've got, again, something very distinct, like a person who's clearly in front of the background, and you have good lighting also so that the software can differentiate the background from the foreground. It is using the cameras to try to determine distance, but it's also looking at at the image itself and kind of combining all that stuff together to do what you're seeing here. This is not an easy thing to do. It's pretty remarkable that they can program this thing to do this and then get it into a phone's processor, but that's what it's like living in the future, I guess. We looked at a dual camera device from Huawei a few weeks ago called the Honor 8, and it does a similar function but not as well. So you can see what a lot of software engineering will do when you're trying to do some crazy stuff with these dual cameras. And this is still in beta, so I'm eager to come back to this after they've had some time to work with this and tweak it and see what the final version looks like. Now, I was also quite pleased with the optical image stabilizer on the 7 Plus. The 7 now has one also in the smaller form factor, so that will give you a steadier image as you're out walking around. And in that video you just saw, I was walking pretty forcefully and it was keeping the image very stable. The video frame rates are the same as they were in the prior generation, so it'll go up to 4K at 30 frames per second. That's what I usually shoot all of my video with. You can also do 1080p at 60 frames per second, and it has the same 240 frames per second slow-mo mode as the 6S did. Now, graphically, the phone is an improvement over the prior version, and we're seeing some better performances on benchmarks like this one. The problem is a lot of the games that you might get on a smartphone don't really target the top of the line, while the top of the line is the top of the line. So you're never going to really find a lot of games that take advantage of what this phone can do graphically. But I think there are some applications like video editing and some of the photo portrait mode stuff you just saw that will take advantage of the additional hardware on here. And on the 3D Mark slingshot test, which we were running just a second ago, we got a score of 3,681, which puts the iPhone 7 Plus at the top of the heap of all of the phones I have tested here on the channel, but it's not all that much faster than the OnePlus 3, which just came out recently. That's an Android phone, but it performs about the same as the 7 Plus does here. Its camera isn't as good. There's always some compromises here or there, but it's a lot less expensive at around $400 versus the $800 plus you might be paying for an iPhone 7 Plus. So there are some good choices out there because the rest of the market has been catching up with Apple, and we're seeing this being played out more and more often now, as there are a lot of great smartphone choices out there that may not cost as much, that will give you most of the functionality you might be looking for in an iPhone. So there are certainly some great choices out there right now, which is great for consumers. And I also think we're hitting a point where cell phone, smartphone technology has matured. It's gotten to a point where there isn't a lot of must-have features that don't exist yet. So really now it's marginal increases in performance, tweaks to the camera, and I'm seeing Apple spending a lot more time on their camera lately, which is probably the one area that can be improved the most on smartphones. And this is certainly a really cool looking camera. So the cost on the 7 Plus here is significant. You're going to be looking at $769 for the 32 gigabyte version. This 128 gig version I have is $869. There's also a 256 gigabyte version for a whopping $969. So you can see how expensive these phones are. There are a number of different financing options. So in my case, my carrier subsidized about half the price of this phone. Apple has a monthly plan where you pay out in installments. They cover you with Apple Care. So if you drop the phone, $30 gets it fixed to replace the screen, and then you get a new phone every year as long as you keep paying them for it. So there's a bunch of different options you can do for pricing, but iPhones are definitely the most expensive phone on the market right now, and that used to get you something more, but now there's certainly some Android options that you should definitely consider that might cost less from manufacturers you may not be all that familiar with, like OnePlus or Huawei, but there's a lot of great choices out there that you should definitely take a look at if the price of a new iPhone is too much. But overall, I have to say it's a nice improvement over the 6S. Is it a necessary upgrade? Well, if the camera here looks like something you could use, especially that zooming option or the portrait option, then maybe definitely give it a consideration. But to be honest with you, having used my 6S every single day for the last year or so, I really was not all that excited to upgrade, and I'm still not all that excited with the 7 Plus. It's a lot bigger than my 6S was just in size, but the only big change here for me is the camera, and that's certainly something I can find useful for what I do here on the channel. But again, I think if I was out in the market and very happy with my 6 or my 6S, there's really no reason to upgrade. This 6S is still a very good phone, and now it costs a lot less too. This is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching. This channel is brought to you by my Patreon supporters. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/Patreon to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/S.